Welcome to my channel Shadows of History. I live in a small town, and there is a strange glow coming from the mountains. As anyone from the south can attest to, there is little to nothing to do other than hang out in the Walmart parking lot. And it's not very often when people from said place actually make a name for themselves. Well, that was the case here until about 2 years ago, when some kid from the local high school named Jamie got a full-ride scholarship to an Ivy League school. Now, that isn't too strange, but he went on to make a treatment for Alzheimer's using some sort of fungi, and now he has a cult-like following in the town. He always talks about how, when he was studying for a project on bioluminescence, one of his samples got contaminated by some sort of fungi, and he saw that it started copying the bacteria perfectly. This is what led him to eventually making a treatment for Alzheimer's. But I always found it strange that he always talked about how alluring the glow is. And don't get me wrong, if I see something glowing, it tends to catch my attention, but the way he talks about it is just odd, like a glaze goes over his eye, the same look someone has as they gaze into a fire. I suppose I should probably introduce myself after all of that. It's just hard to keep track of everything strange that's happened over the past year, and I wanted to log what I think is the epicenter. My name is Nick, I just turned 20, and I live on the side of a mountain just outside of a small town, and I help run my family's manufacturing business. It feels weird sharing my information on the internet when my parents told me not to do that my whole life, but I need to share what has been going on over the past summer. 9 months ago, I stopped hearing the voices I sometimes hear before I go to bed or when I wake up in the morning. I usually just hear people yelling my name or knocking on my door. It only happens once or twice a week. So when it didn't happen for a while, I thought that was strange. I've always had issues with sleep, so I figured I was finally getting good sleep at first. But it clearly wasn't, when about 3 weeks later I awoke in the night to find that there was a faint glow coming from my window. Thinking it was a full moon, I opened my blinds to find that the sky was cloudy, and the ever-so-faint blue glow cutting through the forested void was coming from the top of the mountain I live on. Thinking it was just some sort of reflection of light from the town, I eventually just went back to bed. Over the next week, I began to notice that if I left the blinds closed, I would wake up in the night, and that the faint glow was still there. I just figured the town was growing, and maybe someone had moved in at the top of the mountain. But then I thought about it for a second. Why would either the town lights or someone's porch light help me sleep? They tell you to keep your phone off at night because of the blue light, so why would this make me sleep better? So I decided that if it kept up for the next week, I'd go up to investigate. A week passes, and it's still the same thing. If I leave the blinds open, I get a full night of sleep, and if I leave them closed, I wake up. So I packed a tent and supplies to go camping at the top of the hill. It's not uncommon for me to go camping in the woods around my house, but never up the hill, because my parents never really liked it when I went past the property line. But I'm grown up now, and it's not like they are checking anyway. So after filing the quarterly taxes for the business, I went to the top before the sunset to see if any new construction had been going on, or if there was a house I was unaware of. There wasn't any that I could see. Just rocks and pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. So I pitched my tent on a small plateau that was interrupted on one side by a sudden slope upward. I cleared out a small area to start a fire and cooked some hot dogs. As the umbra of the earth fell across the sky and the darkness crept in around me, it was just that dark. I couldn't even see the lights of the town. The only source of light was my fire. I couldn't help but think of an anglerfish using its light to lure in its prey, and the fact I couldn't see any lights was confirmation that I had already been swallowed. But eventually, I calmed myself down by telling myself that it was just my eyes being too adjusted to the fire. So I retreated to my tent in a clumsy haste, and that's when the glow started. It was faint, but it slowly overtook the fire. Once again, the fear of being lured out sank in, but the angler had laid its bait well and lured me with knowledge. I unzipped the tent ever so slightly and peeked through to see that the fire had gone out, like the heat and oxygen had been sucked out of it. No smoke and no embers, and the ground beneath it had begun to glow a deep, sickeningly beautiful blue. My fear sank back in once it started spreading in a slow, radiant pattern, almost pulsing with life. But the beat was unnatural. It was inconsistent, like it was mimicking a heartbeat. I then zipped up the tent fully as the glow crept underneath it. I could see the glow peeking through the polyester. I did my best to avoid the glow, But once it was under me, the pulse became faster and more consistent. It dawned on me that it was my heartbeat. It was copying my heartbeat. As I saw the mesmerizing glow spread to the forest around me, I began to feel a calm envelop me. I can't explain why, but it just slowly lulled me into a calm, and the call of sleep fell upon me as I laid down and sank into darkness. I woke up the next day in a panic. But I was relieved when I saw that there was no glow below me. I slowly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see everything was fine. Until I looked down and noticed the hot dogs that I opened must have been knocked onto the ground when I had fled to my tent. The hot dogs were perfectly and unnaturally clean. Even more so, there were more than I brought, and it looked like some of them were fused to the ground. After seeing that, I quickly packed everything up and left. The whole next day, I was constantly thinking about what I saw. I couldn't get it off my mind. Like, what the hell was that? And what was worse is that the angler was swaying the light in my mind to call me back. So the next week, after I had broken one of the CNC machines down in the shop, I spent hours fixing it as fast as I could so I'd have time to get to the mountain top before sunset, a bit earlier in the day to get a better look at the land around me. But I was shocked to find the hot dogs I had left still in perfect shape, but only the ones that looked like they had fused to the ground. The closer I looked at them, I realized that stringy appendages from the ground were attached to them. I went to grab a large stick to probe at them. I found a nice, large, dead branch behind the large mass of rock and dirt at the end of the plateau when I noticed a cabin in the distance. As I got closer, I saw a person sitting on the porch. Realizing I was probably on private property, I tried to slowly back away. As I did, the person shouted, "Are you lost?" I, in an awkward tone, said, "No, I just live down the hill, and I was just exploring." The person, who I could now see was a young man about my age who looked familiar but I couldn't tell from this distance, said, "I love the woods up here. I come up to this cabin just to get fresh air and to think. It's nice to know that someone else has a proclivity for the world around them." I replied, "It is nice to enjoy the fresh air out here, but I should really get back to my house before it gets dark." With that, the man nodded in an approving way as I slunk my way back to my camping spot and prepared to disturb the mutated hot dog. I slowly moved the stick toward the hot dog, fearing that the tendrils would wrap up the stick and onto me. But as I moved the hot dog, nothing happened. The tendrils snapped, leaving an intact hot dog. Relieved that I wasn't consumed, I began to set up camp and prepared to run some experiments. As the sun set, the sky ablaze in a deep red before sinking into night, I waited with a bag of hot dogs for the hypnotic blue glow to start. As it did, I stayed in my tent with the door halfway unzipped, as it kept me safe last time. From there, I threw a hot dog onto the ground and watched in disgust as the hot dog began to melt into a clear, jelly-like ooze as it pulsated with a glow as if it were alive. Then it began to spread out and morph into two hot dogs, the new one with tendrils stuck to the ground. The tendrils glowed and danced in the same hypnotic sway as the rest of the forest around me. A sudden snap in the wood brought me out of the daze I was in. I looked up in horror to see a pallid figure moving toward me. I realized it was a man in white coveralls. As he approached me, he said, "I thought you said you were heading back to your house." I, speechless, kind of just stammered, but before I could answer, he said, "It's best that you stay in your tent. You really don't want getting this stuff on your skin." That I could tell from the experiment I just ran, but I just got out a timid, "Okay." As he got closer, he tossed me coveralls and said, "I saw the hot dogs out here and figured some dumbass was gonna get themselves killed. Now put that on so you can get out of here." It was at that moment I recognized his eyes, those glazed-over, fire-gazed blue eyes. This was Jamie. What the hell was he doing out here? I suppose, being a trust fund baby. His parents bought him a summer cabin in the hills when he wants to pretend to be lower middle class. But being polite, I put on the suit and crawled out of the tent to thank him. He said, while looking at me with a curious gaze, "What were you doing up here in the first place?" I explained that I had been seeing the glow, and that it helps me sleep at night, and that I got curious as to what it was. He looked at me with the most shock that can be conveyed behind a mask and said in a somber tone, "So it called to you." Internally, I thought, what the fuck is this guy on, before saying, "What do you mean it called to me?" His eyes returned to that burning glaze as he murmured, It called to you as it called to me. He blinked and then said, "You should head back to your house." Me, being totally weirded out and scared at this point, took his demand with great delight. He helped me pack my things up, and I grabbed my light from my bag and slowly made my way down the hill as Jamie headed back to the cabin. The trip down was a bit scary in the normal sense, the fear of getting lost, getting attacked by a wild animal, or falling, but I recognized my landmarks, and it was more or less a straight shot from the top to my house, which was on its own lower ridge. Once I made it back, I figured I would take a shower. When in the bathroom, I noticed my normally pale green eyes had a slight blue tint and glaze to them, the same way Jamie's did. Over the following days, I thought about going to the optometrist, but what would I even say? That I think my eyes are infected by a magic blue fungus? Before I could work up the courage or make a lie, the blue faded from my eyes. But that was the least of my concerns, as I started having weird dreams. I dreamt of orbs spinning around me with an energetic hum. Other nights, I would have dreams of metal peeling and screeching. And the most frightening were the dreams where I couldn't move and I was just sitting in the dark, and I could hear a large repeating thumping as the void turned into the same beautiful blue glow. When I would awake from these dreams, I would be in a mental fog. After I would get ready for my day, it would clear up. Despite everything going on, I actually found it easier to do my work. Quoting customer orders just felt more natural to me, like my mind would just relax. The descriptions for the specified aircraft parts appeared in my mind as if the words themselves were morphing and shifting into the parts. And don't get me wrong, customers send schematics or 3D models. It's just that I have never been able to exactly imagine the part perfectly before seeing it, especially for aircraft parts. Those tend to be more complicated than other orders. Over the next couple of days, the morning mental fog subsided, but this didn't stop me from seeing a neurologist because my anxiety had gotten to me, telling me that the blue, probably fungal spores in my eyes had somehow ended up in my brain. I decided to just complain about mental fog. As the time dragged on, eventually the silence in the room was broken as the doctor came back in and said everything looks fine, and the only thing he noticed was that I was dehydrated. He told me to drink more water and sent me home. Relieved, I found it easy to fall asleep that night, only to be greeted by a new dream. One of flames, where I could see every molecular reaction. I could understand where the pressure and expansion was as the flames danced around me. I was mesmerized when suddenly everything went dark and I heard a thumping slowly grow, and I knew I was back in the void. Once the glowing started, I, being lucid from the dream before, was much more aware of what was around me. I realized I wasn't in a void. It looked like I was in a cave with uneven walls. All I could move were my eyes. As I looked all the way left, I could see one small spot unilluminated, unchanging. And down to my far right, I could see something that was a perfect right angle like the edge of a square. I couldn't really make out what it was, as I was ripped from my dream by a glistening light. As I opened my eyes, I realized I had slept in and it was a round one. I got up and rushed to our workshop towards the bottom of the mountain. I grabbed some coveralls, a respirator, and some goggles. I knew that cave had to be somewhere on the mountain, and I had to find it. But then I stopped and thought about it for a second. Why did I want to find it? I've been nothing but scared of this stuff, but it keeps calling to me. To compromise with my two sides arguing, I told myself I would only look during the day, as it seems like it's only. I saw that it was 5:07. I sort of laughed at myself, seeing that I was so occupied by a bunch of rock that I wasted 3 hours. Knowing I have about 3.5 hours before it gets dark, I keep looking. I found a creek not too far from my camping spot, hidden from view with a soft rolling ridge. I began following the creek to see where it came from, in hopes that at its source would be a cave. As I followed the road made from rounded rocks, I found the soft trickle of water comforting. Once I had made it to the end of the creek, there was nothing, just water springing out of the ground. So out of defeat, I decided to just enjoy the soft, calming sound of the creek. Once I sat down and got comfortable, I let the calm rhythm of the water trickle wash over my mind, the constant slight increase in flow followed by the decrease, like the water too was alive and enjoying the majestic pines that grow near the top, with a warm summer breeze dancing across the ridge lines. After sitting for 10 minutes, it occurred to me that I should check the time. It was 6:20. I decided that I had looked enough for today and that I would have to come back later. Once I had stood up, I fully noticed how consistently the water was flowing and almost pulsing out of one spot. In a last-ditch effort of curiosity, I started removing the dirt and rocks at the waterhead. The flow of water increased, and I could clearly see that the water was being pushed out like blood from an artery. Freaked out, I immediately covered it back up, but it didn't matter. The flow had increased so much that it just pushed the loose dirt and gravel away. Running away, I saw as I got further the stream had decreased until it stopped gushing out of the ground and returned to a slow trickle. Out of luck and running out of daylight, I reluctantly made my way to Jamie's cabin, hoping he would be there. As I got to the cabin, I took in fully how nice it was. It was incredibly well maintained, and there was a small asphalt road running to the back of it. It being dug into the hillside a bit, I could see from this angle that it had a half-basement. As I got closer, the more I hoped Jamie wasn't there, as I really hate impeding on people's privacy. As I made it to the front porch, I knocked on the green door. A couple of moments later, Jamie opened the door. He looked like he had just woken up, as his medium-length curly black hair was a mess and his eyes were lightly bloodshot. When he fully took in who he was looking at, he said, "I'm a bit surprised you're here. I was actually planning on reaching out to you, but I see you beat me to it." I replied, "I didn't mean to disturb you, but I just have so many questions." At that, Jamie let out a slight sigh and said, "There's a lot to go over, so I'll try to make it brief, as I don't know a whole lot about it. I learned a lot from when it contaminated my school project. I know that it can copy and replicate organic matter, and it can alter your cognition, which is useful for when you study neuroscience. I'm not sure of the effects on you, but if they are anything like mine, you must have had dreams and visions of the fungus and cells mutating, giving you insight on how to improve yourself. I really don't want to sound like a pretentious prick, but I feel like it made me smarter and gave the people in this town a weird dedication towards me." Well, Jamie definitely did the opposite of what he set out to do, because he did, in fact, sound like a prick. But I replied, "I haven't had dreams about cells or anything. I've had dreams about fire and metal, and this one really weird dream where I'm stuck in a cave. Now that I think about it, that's the whole reason I came up here. I was trying to find it." That's when Jamie cut me off. "Interesting. It affects you differently. But also, you just assumed a cave in your dreams was real." At that, it hit me. Yeah, I did just assume it was real, and that maybe I'm just going a bit crazy. As Jamie said, "So what exactly do you do?" I replied, "Oh, I work with my parents in our small manufacturing shop. I build mostly small metal parts like custom door hinges, but sometimes we get to make parts for trains and planes. It's really fun actually. Well, for the most part." Jamie, with a thoughtful look as his eyes glazed over, said, "Maybe it shows you what's at the forefront of your mind. I'm personally almost as in the dark as you. I wish I was able to help more." I replied, "Well, I appreciate it. At least I'm pretty sure it isn't gonna kill me. But hey, one last thing. Have you been down to the creek nearby? I just had a really weird experience with it. It was gushing out of the ground like a pulse." Jamie, looking a little confused, returned, "Personally, I haven't seen that, but my best guess would be that some air probably got trapped and periodically pushed the water up." Once again questioning my sanity, I just replied, "Oh yeah, that would make sense. I think I've just been overthinking everything recently." Jamie replied, "I get that. I was in the same boat. I have some sodas and leftover pizza in here if you want to relax a bit." At this point, it was actually getting on my nerves how nice of a person Jamie is. I always expected him to be some out-of-touch asshole, but I reluctantly accepted his offer. The cabin was small, about the size of a two-bedroom apartment. There was a door where I assumed the stairs to the basement was, 2 rooms to the right, and in the middle was the kitchen/dining room. Jamie went to the fridge and asked what soda I wanted. I asked if there was Dr. Pepper, which Jamie gave a thumbs up before handing me one. I said, "Other than hiking and camping, I enjoy posting things on the internet, and every now and then I play video games or board games with my friends. So, do you do anything other than be a professional student?" Jamie looked a bit sad at that and said, "Not really. At least, not anymore." has consumed my whole life. Even in my free time, I find that I can't stop working on how to further control the fungus, to program it to make my treatments more effective and to expand what it can do. The only thing that slows my mind a bit is coming up here, where the glow in the night calms me. But in the time I do actually allow for myself, I enjoy painting and some of the things you mentioned, like hiking, and I have a decent collection of games. Anyways, I know you already know who I am, but I'm Jamie. He then stuck out his hand. I replied in turn and said, I'm Nick. I then checked my phone and saw it was 6:52. I looked up and out the window over the sink and could see that the shadows of the trees were fleeing the radiant light of the sun. Noticing me looking around, Jamie said, You should probably get going before it gets dark. With that, I said, Thank you for all the help, and I will let you know if anything else happens. With that, I made my way out of the cabin. As I started making my way back to my house, I saw that the path back was already in shadow. Worried that I might not make it back in time, I put on the coveralls I had packed. As the sun sank lower, the forest was slowly drained of color. As I was halfway back to my house, I saw an exception to the now colorless void, a faint blue glow coming from the inside of a rotted tree. Trying my best to avoid the glow, I started walking out and around it. As I did, the glow began spreading toward me like a snake slithering for its prey. I started running in the direction, but the glow kept getting faster and faster. Eventually, it caught up to me but kept going past me. Then, to my surprise and horror, it turned and started making its way back towards me. Now running from it once again, I lost my footing as I ran across some rocks. I smacked my head on a tree. I felt the pain shoot from my skull down into my spine and shoulders. Falling to the ground, I reached for my head and felt a warm, wet liquid. Doing my best to stop the bleeding by pulling my shirt over my head, I then laid on the ground from the searing pain as I saw stars, hoping that the coveralls would keep me safe again. But seeing the glow expanding and pulsing faster as it raced towards me, adrenaline filled my body. Tears running from my eyes and blood seeping into my shirt, I got up and ran through the pain. I wanted to stop. I wanted to lay down, but I couldn't. As I ran, I saw what could have been a big rock formation. It was hard to tell, as it was too dark at this point to tell, and my vision was blurred. It was my best hope, thinking the rocks, not being organic matter, would be too much for the glow to spread onto, or at least would slow it. Climbing onto the rocks, I prayed that it would be enough. As the glow caught up, it surrounded the rock I was on and just stayed there, getting brighter, once again copying my heartbeat. As it continued to get brighter, I could see how badly I was bleeding. It was so much so it was running down my face. I wiped it off with my hand, flinging some accidentally onto the glow. When I did, it got even brighter, blindingly bright. The pain in my head and neck getting worse, and to my terror, the glow slowly started creeping up the rock. I was filled with the soul-sucking feeling of being dragged into the depths of hopelessness, as I knew the angler was finally gonna get its meal. I, in one last-ditch effort of survival, jumped off the rock and heard a snap as I fell further than I intended. Once I landed, I heard a second. When I reached a point where the ground was wet and mushy, immediately I pulled back my hand, trying my best, using the faint glow chasing me, to see what it was. I determined it was moss. At this point, the pounding in my head was awful. It was painfully loud in my ears, and I thought, is this really how I'm gonna die? As a missing person case? I knew I only had so much adrenaline left in me, and I was hoping that this cave had a second entrance. But the further I made my way in, the more hopeless I got. But as the glow got brighter, I could see I had come to an opening. At the end, out the opening, I could see the faint silhouette of trees. I kept crawling toward them when my arm hit something made of wood. Shocked, I stopped and grabbed it, only to see in the dimly lit cave that it was a painting. It was only about a foot wide and tall. I couldn't really tell what it was. It was covered in strange etchings and symbols. As the glow increased in brightness, I saw a slightly larger painting of a man with blonde hair, a beard, and an old worn-out trifold hat in a garden on the cave wall, with a beautiful white frame covered with lifelike flowers carved into the wood. I can't fully explain why in the moment I took the paintings, but I did. Maybe it was from the trauma to my head, or maybe I thought they would be worth something. But as I took the painting of the man, I snapped the rope holding it to the wall. Then I made my way out of the cave back into the forest, my foot now killing me and the stars in my vision coming back. I saw lights off in the distance. Hoping it was home, I made the best pace I could towards them, hoping the cave had slowed the glow enough to let me escape. Constantly looking back, I never saw the glow leave the cave. As I got closer to the lights, I could see that it was my house. Now hobbling, I made it back. Once there, I put the paintings in my car before getting the attention of my parents, who promptly drove me to the hospital, asking a million questions, which I lied about all. I said I found a cave and went exploring it, got lost in it, and hit my head standing up too fast in a small part of the cave, and I rolled my ankle while exploring. They hit me with the classic, "Haven't we taught you better than to do things like this?" And, "What were you thinking? You could have gotten yourself killed." After I had been treated in the hospital, I was sent back home with stitches on my head and a good chunk of my hair missing, and a cast on my right leg. Luckily, it was only a fracture in my ankle. When I felt well enough, and when my parents weren't in the house, as they would try to stop me from moving very much, I made my way to my car to recover the paintings and was horrified. When I had looked at the painting of the man in full light, his eyes were human eyes. The whole painting was made from human body parts. The canvas was just skin stretched. It was bruised and discolored to make all the shapes and colors of the painting. The frame was made from twisted bones wrapped around each other, and the flowers poking out were made from the same sickening mess. And what I thought was the rope holding the painting to the cave wall was the nerve endings of the eyes that I had snapped while removing it. After this discovery, I didn't know what to do. Should I have called the police? I really didn't know, but I decided to put it in a box and store it in the garage until I figured out what to do with it. Dinner wasn't very appetizing that night after what I found earlier in the day. The thought of the haunting eyes lingered in my mind for the rest of the night until I couldn't resist the urge to sleep and was brought into slumber, where I had the same dream in the void. But I could no longer hear the thumping or see the glowing. Just a voice in the back of my mind saying,